I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. When you think about it, all problems and opportunities relate back to the individual. So with that in mind, think about this. Today, our biggest challenges are not healthcare, poverty, political divisiveness, or even climate change. Our biggest challenges are within ourselves, getting out of our own way and finding and trusting our authentic, intuitive voice. Many of us know that we are intuitive, but lack the courage or safety to speak up. This is especially true at work. For example, in some organizations, the mantra is evidence-based decisions where only subject matter experts are allowed to speak up. And while company value statements encourage people to share their ideas, many organizations still dismiss anyone who can't speak the language of data. Speaking up during a meeting with no more than a gut feeling is cause of being seen as flaky and unprepared. Employees who keep quiet in overconfident organizations can create a company-wide blind spot with devastating results. Think about Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix, but passed, and now just down the street in Bend, Oregon stands its last store. What would have happened if Blockbuster, BlackBerry, and Kodak had cultures that valued data and intuition? The speed of change right now is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of our lives. And to keep up with this pace of change, we need to recognize patterns faster, deepen collaboration, and accelerate learning. We need leaders that encourage intuition so employees feel safe enough to point out issues and share untested creative ideas. Well, my next guest on the Business of Intuition is definitely in line with this line of thinking. She has such a great background in business, psychology, and coaching that the things we talked about range from all sorts of things around authenticity, leadership, visioning, intuition, engagement, just to name a few. Miriam Meima is a coach and a facilitator for over 20 years, dedicating her life to studying the overlap between business and psychology. Miriam has coached founders and executives at hundreds of companies, including a dozen 1 billion plus organizations. She often partners with companies from Series B all the way through going public. She works one-on-one with senior leaders, facilitates team offsites, and develops customized leadership development journeys for leaders at all levels. Her specialty is in helping people unlock the next level of performance while maximizing authenticity. Miriam's credentials include, listen to this, an MA in organizational management and development, a BA in business and psychology, and she's also a master's certified coach, which is the PhD of coaching, by the way, with the International Coaching Federation. And she's a fellow at Harvard Institute of Coaching and a member of Forbes Coaching Council. Miriam Meima on the Business of Intuition. Miriam, it's great to have you on the show. I really am looking forward to this. You've got quite the background. You know, I see these three different pieces of your life with respect to your personal side. You've got a master certified coach background, which is, for those of you who don't know, it is the PhD of coaching. You know, you don't get any higher up than this. It takes a heck of a lot of work to be able to get to that point. Then you've also got a background in psychology, and then also some strong background education-wise and experience-wise in business. So wonderful triple threat, as they say in our industry, right? But I wanted just maybe if you could just start us off, there is sometimes still a need to sort of define what coaching is versus therapy. Could you sort of give us a little bit of navigation about how they're separate and how they are similar?
Yeah, great. I think of therapy as standing in the present and looking backwards and saying, over the course of my life, what has happened that has shaped who I am, and what about that do I need to heal or resolve in order to feel whole? And I think of coaching as standing in the present, looking forward and saying, what is it that I want in my life? And there is a reference. So there are rear view mirrors in coaching saying, okay, what is holding me back? What has happened that might be influencing how I'm approaching this leadership challenge or this life challenge. And so there is a moment of looking back, like, okay, when did this show up? And when did I first learn this? And how much of this is serving me? And how can I kind of sort through or unpack what has shaped me in order to feel more empowered, more clear, there's more whole in moving forward. So that's where there's overlap. But it's a very, I think, different vantage point and intention. One is, like I said, looking backwards, and the other is looking forwards. Yeah.
It's a great way of being able to think about it. Do you feel that sometimes a coach will have a coachee that really needs a therapist, not a coach?
Yes, yeah. I have many clients that have both. And I often am sending people to therapists specifically for trauma work. I know personally, I work with a coach, I work with therapists, I work with I basically have my whole support team. And I go to different individuals, usually for one-off sessions or short series of sessions, depending on what's happening in my life in that moment. And I absolutely rely on therapists to help unlock trauma and heal trauma. I think that that's something that's squarely outside of the realm of coaching. And in terms of the nervous system, I personally love EMDR as a modality. So
Could
for
you
me,
tell people what that is, just so that they understand the acronym?
Yeah. Do you know it? I always get high. Okay. I movement something.
You were asking like you had forgotten.
I'm serious. I'm like, do you have my back on this?
Sounds familiar.
I'm
threw that out so haphazardly, like, well, EMDR,
EMDR, yeah. So EMDR, I literally forget the acronym, but what I love about it is, so it's in most cases, you're either using light or you're holding paddles, if you're actually in person with your therapist, in both hands. And either using light or these paddles, you're stimulating the brain in the different hemispheres of the brain. So you can think of it as bilateral stimulation. And so what EMDR requires is for you to feel very connected and well-resourced to your best self. And then you kind of you imagine or relive a traumatic event, which in and of itself sounds hard, but you're doing that while you're stimulating both parts of the brain. So you're starting to basically desensitize this event. And it starts at, let's say, a level 8 on a 1 to 10 scale in terms of how traumatic you feels as you imagine it. Through just a couple sessions, it starts to fall off into maybe 1 or 2. And so it just starts to get blended into the rest of our life experiences and doesn't hold so much energy, which usually helps.
Literally
takes the charge off of it so that you can go about living your life and you're not constantly getting triggered, which is going to happen because we all have traumatic events and experiences.
I looked it up as you were talking. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. No wonder nobody remembers it. It's hard to say.
It is desensitization. That I feel like every listener should now try and say that word out loud 3 times.
Yeah, right. It's good for actors for their vocal warm-ups. That's fascinating. I'd not heard of that before as you started talking more about it. And so as you think about, because you've got this triple vantage point around looking in the rearview mirror, looking forward, but also having a strong foundation in business. As you look over the trauma, if you will, of the last few years, and we all know what we're talking about with pandemics and social unrest and politics and the uncertainty with the economy, and there's just been a tremendous amount of disruption. How do you feel people are right now? Are they in need of more therapy, or are we still seeing that by and large, people are healthy enough for coaching?
I do think people are healthy enough for coaching overall. I think what's being asked of us right now, so you're right, there has been trauma, and I think, but it's been low grade and sustained. And so that has a unique impact on us. Personally, this is a bias that I have, is that what's being asked of us during all of this challenging time, and yes, it has been compounded by all sorts of things, is to really confront what matters to us in life. When things shut down and we were all of a sudden in shelter in place, we were forced to kind of look in the mirror and think about who are the people that really matter and what are the experiences that really matter. And so all of our social obligations fell off. Literally going to the office all of a sudden changed. All of our routines were interrupted. And so we had the opportunity individually and collectively to reset in a way that we've never have, I believe, in the course of human evolution. I don't think we're really taking a full advantage of that. And we're still in a kind of a pocket of possibility as it relates to really asking ourselves, what do I want my life to be filled with? Who are the people that matter? What are the experiences that I care about? How do I build my life to allow for balance, whatever that means to me? And how do I only say yes to the things that truly align with the life I want to live? Knowing that I literally have choice, I'm at choice in a way that I never have before. And I don't have to use excuses anymore like COVID. I can actually just design from scratch how I want to be.
Is that stressful in and of itself? I mean, I remember once going to China. We were in this restaurant. It was a vegetarian Chinese restaurant, and it was beautiful. We sat down and they gave us this huge menu, and it was pages and pages and pages of what was supposedly delicious food, which it was. I remember feeling a little bit of stress, like there's too many options here. I don't know how to choose. I don't know what I want. Are we feeling some added stress by being given the menu of choice and we don't really know what we want?
You know what, Dean? What's so helpful when we have infinite possibilities? Our intuition.
Good for you, girl.
It's nice so freaking helpful. I can't help it. It's all right, like, so that's bring
it into fruition.
Okay, I'll connect it. I'll connect the dots, but it's just a shout out to you. And so anyone who hasn't watched Dean's TED Talk, please go watch it, because you are weaving in a lot of your own wisdom and point of view there that I really respect. But I believe that, yes, if we go to our right brain, if we go to our rational mind to try to design something when we're faced with infinite possibilities, we're going to feel overwhelmed and stress, and it's going to actually exacerbate more of what we don't want in our life. So it takes being able to slow down and go inward and connect with a part of us that has always known. And that to me is my intuition. And that takes sustained practices like meditation or going for a walk or drinking tea, but being able to slow down long enough and use tools like journaling or conversation with people that you feel comfortable with, so you can kind of discover in real time as you're speaking out loud or thinking out loud and tapping into the kind of this deeper part of yourself or your creative space, creative mind, left brain, to help us understand what is true. And usually, so when I'm looking at a menu like that, I don't read. I intentionally don't read. I open and see where my eyes are drawn. And then I plan to order that. And then I might read just out of curiosity what else is on the menu. Or I might ask the waiter, what do you think I have to try? But I always order the thing that my eyes were drawn to first.
It's so funny you say that, because it's exactly how I am with menus. I mean, it's always the first thing that my eye sees. And then I spend the next 2 minutes justifying why that was the right thing to do in the first place, which I think is somewhat of a metaphor for what we're talking about here.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where vision board, like these are literal tools that people use and that I personally use when I'm trying to figure out what matters. And I look for patterns and what's consistent. And I think I have to usually give myself permission to trust what's coming up, which is easier said than done for most folks.
So it's helping me clarify some more things as we're talking about this, because if you were to say, all right, I'm a individual, I now have gone through this interesting time in our history. I've now given choice to be able to decide what I want. If I use sort of the typical analytical brain of looking at all these options and approaching it from that perspective, it could be overwhelming because there's just so many. I mean, the menu is too big. And then you almost start thinking like, well, then how do I then do this? And do I commit without knowing, or do I only commit once I do know? And so there's a whole thing that can go on into a stressful situation. Confidence can start getting depleted because of that. But to your point, I think if you are to tap into that intuitive side, the pattern recognizing side, I also have noticed in myself and others that confidence goes up because we don't have to figure all this other stuff out. It cuts right
Right.
to it. You get to the core and you don't have to figure it out. You just sort of know you're being drawn in a particular direction.
Yeah. And being drawn, that's the key, right? Because if we can all become students of ourselves, what we'll start to notice is we feel pulled in certain places. And that's usually intuition at work. Whereas if we're forcing something or we're trying to push ourselves in a certain direction, that's usually more of our will or our rational mind telling us what we should, quote unquote, be doing. So being confident was another word you said, which I think is so key because that's usually the unlock to trusting ourselves. So if I can be confident enough to be drawn, then the rest kind of starts to take care of itself. And it really at a macro level and a micro level, meaning like what to eat, who to call today. I so often someone pops to mind and I reach out to them and they say, "How did you know to text me?" Because I'm going through something. I'm like, I don't know, right? That's my intuition, but I'm more on macro level of really what career feels aligned to me? Who are the relationships that I'm going to invest in and building consistently? Those are, I think, more macro level questions and good ones to answer.
So we talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button, but the thought is that leadership is being nudged in a different direction than it had before, because leadership is always a function of our environment and of the society and the team and the people and the economy we're in. It leads and yet it follows at the same time. It sets a course, but it also has to be reactive to what's going on. It's bipolar, if you will, in that way. And so speak to about how leadership is needing to change, since you do have this sort of triple threat perspective, if you will. And what does that look like? What is it, if somebody's listening to this, I can resonate on this, but what does that mean for me as a leader moving into 2023, for example? What can I be working on to best be effective given the circumstances and the trends and so forth that you've been talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is this is kind of a combination of my intuition and my experience and my education. I really think that the trajectory we're on is leaders need to be increasingly agile. So we need which is an interesting thing because we have to be committed to a North Star in order to rally humans in terms of interpersonal dynamics. We need something to orient towards in order to facilitate great decision making on every level of our organizations, however small or large. People need to know what matters, and so that they can make decisions day to day without being told what to do. So that's essential. So how can we stay true to some North Star? What is it that as a business we are focused on? So that might be a what, meaning a certain desired outcome, or it might be a why, which is part of the work that Simon Sinek has done of like why do we do what we do? Either way, there needs to be some sort of very clear North Star that's quite consistent. Shy of that, how can I be agile in terms of how we're responding to market conditions? Because I personally have never been busier than the year 2020 because of every business needing to pivot overnight because things were shifting. So businesses were skyrocketing or collapsing, and teams were needing to relate to each other in a remote or distributed environment, much more so than ever before. So there were all of these layers happening, but the businesses that did best were the ones who had leaders who were willing to continually go back to the whiteboard, blank space, blue sky thinking of, based on everything I know, what's possible today and how do we fit in? So there's this kind of similar to how we were talking about on the individual level of confidence unlocks this trust and being able to feel drawn. I think the same is true for a business. So the leader needs to know itself, the kind of the essence of the business so well that the leader can feel drawn. Where are we being drawn? Where does what we do, where is it needed today? And if I'll pause there.
No, I think you're right on. There's the little TED talk that you had mentioned before, the little call out made me think about an idea that I had that I shared was the three P's, which was presence, purpose, and play. And the presence
Yeah.
was that process, that discipline to be able to tune out the mental brain and sort of receive and allow yourself to, whether it's walking in a forest or whatever, accept information that may not come through your normal way of processing information. And then this purpose piece, which is that North Star that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Where's our direction? Where's our intentionality? And can we do it with a sense of lightheartedness without getting too serious about it, which is the play, which is about experimentation, which is about blue sky thinking, which is about trial and error, which is about creativity and all that kind of stuff. I think that still holds true. I'm wondering, is that the role, this visionary that you described? I sometimes am seeing in organizations that if you are lucky, you will find a person who has that kind of skill to see beyond what we are currently involved in, maybe even think 100 years out. And so that North Star gets really developed, really strongly. What I've also noticed, that North Star, the stronger it gets, then it kind of changes the relationship of the rest of the organization, whereby they become the doers and the implementers, and the North Star person is the visionary. And I'm not saying that's a bad model. I think it can work just fine. But do we need more and more workers, mid-level managers, to be those visionaries? Or does that really pretty much get, and should, from a structure perspective, get relegated to a small group of people?
In most cases, I feel like people are wanting that to be top down. Even senior leaders, let's say VP level, most of them don't want to be the ones to go into a room and think about the North Star or even to generate it. They want to have that be told. I think about it as the GPS coordinates. So most of us, even if we identify as leaders, we want to know, where am I supposed to be going? And then I want to feel empowered to choose which direction to get there. Do I want to take the scenic route? Do I want to take the expressway? Do I want to get a helicopter? Do I want to get a charter jet? I'm going to come up with all of the different options to get there. But usually unlocking someone's creativity requires knowing where I'm going. I think what you're touching on, though, is important, is that people need to have their own version of that. So it can't just be in the visionary's language. It has to be something that individuals can adopt as their own North Star and feel a sense of relationship with it, which might mean using different words or having their own lens to relate to it. But if they can't identify with it and essentially adopt it as their own North Star, then you're never going to be able to really allow people to feel both empowered and give them the permission that they need to make the most of what's possible.
Got it. So intuition is one of those things that I've been thinking about around trying to get it out of the closet into the boardroom, so to speak. It's a word that has a certain amount of baggage in some people's minds. It seemed as woo-woo, it seems as unscientific, it seems as unfounded in quote unquote reality. What are some ways that people can encourage intuition in their teams or with themselves without calling it out and then being labeled flaky? How do we encourage intuition in a business without saying that's what it is?
I think for whatever reason, gut is more comfortable with that. My gut is telling me, oh, okay, you have a gut instinct. Oh, that's so good. It's so good for you to have a gut instinct. But if I say my intuition says, people are like, I don't know about that. But I think there still is space, whatever we call it, intuition, gut, for people, for me, to say, I'm going to share something that my gut is telling me is important for us to execute on now. But let's do what in tech we would call a pre-mortem. So let's think ahead to what are the concerns that anyone has about implementing this, any blind spots that this doesn't take into account. So it's not justifying it, but it's not really rationalizing it, but it's allowing reason and data to come and support the path forward, but without second guessing the direction that we're moving or the decision. It's just bolstering it. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other things that I've noticed that are intuitive exercises in teams that we don't necessarily call them that are brainstorming sessions. When we say things like no idea is a bad idea, when we
Yeah.
do blue sky or innovative thinking techniques. So the pre-mortem idea is a great one, which for those who are listening in on this, there's some stuff by, I think Gary Klein was the guy that developed that years ago, but it's basically a post-mortem is one in which you would say, what did we learn from what just happened? On an operating table, somebody doesn't survive. We want to do a post-mortem, hence mortem, they died. What did we learn about that? What did we learn about this project? But pre-mortem is thinking ahead. What if this project hypothetically failed? It hasn't failed yet. We're new. What if it did? What could go wrong? And it allows people to sort of share the things that they've been afraid to share. They've been given the permission to do so. And sometimes that taps into an intuitive side as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is right. So there's generative thinking exercises that's, I think, one of the things we're missing out on the most with asynchronous collaboration. It's very difficult to get into a generative or creative or intuitive state. And so when I am putting something out there, some piece of work, and someone in their 10 minutes between back-to-back meetings is reading and responding to it, the likelihood that they'll be coming or orienting towards that from a generative place is almost nothing. They will be coming at it more likely from a critical lens. So we're devolving essentially, and we're pushing back too much too soon some great ideas. And so that this is one of the main things that I think the business leaders are needing to solve for right now is in an asynchronous collaborative environment. How do we make sure that ideas get enough airtime? And so brainstorming sessions is usually live or synchronous, and that helps everybody feel like they're in a shared experience, even if it's virtual, thinking big, thinking outside the box, activating both hemispheres of our brain so that we can start to understand what's possible. And from there, a plan of execution can be a bit more derived from there.
Yeah. Well, it's also making me think that the asynchronous communication and collaboration you're talking about, we got Zoom calls, we got WebEx calls. We don't have the water cooler conversation that can spur an idea that can then turn into an intuitive conversation. All of a sudden, we now have a whole new wonderful idea that we would have never come to before. I sometimes wonder, and want to get your thoughts on it, is that this environment that we sort of created post, COVID, out of necessity, and we needed to survive. Hence, we had remote teams, we have hybrid teams, but a lot of communication is happening like how you and I are happening. And yet I don't just walk by your office and say, hey, Miriam, how are you? Let's chat. We have to schedule it. We have to become much more intentional. Is this new environment a headwind for intuition? Or are there some opportunities that we can tap into in this virtual hybrid world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both. I would say both. I think it is a headwind. If we aren't intentional about it, I think that the likelihood intuition will emerge in this new world is lower than it would in the kind of the older model, more in-person model. That said, we are now better equipped to set ourselves up for actual free focus time in a way that we couldn't if we were in person. So if we are intentional, we are better off now than we were before. If we are unintentional, we are worse off now than we were before.
So going back to the menu idea, we really have to be intentional with respect to not only our direction, but also the method by which we access information, meaning I'm going to be intentional about being intuitive. I'm going to ask myself, what does my gut say? What does my whatever say regarding anything? But by putting that into our intention, we can actually tap into that kind of information, whether we are on a Zoom call or whether we're sitting face to face.
Yeah, exactly. And we have more autonomy over potentially our schedules. I think everybody has a pretty consistent energy pattern over the course of a day. When am I at my lowest or slumpiest? When am I at my peak or most creative? And when I think of those peaks of productivity as sacred, because what I am capable of when I'm at that peak is I can't try to generate it if I sit down in front of my computer at those slumps, right? There's no substitute for what's possible in those peaks of productivity. So if everybody actually noticed, so became a student of themselves and noticed when are my peaks of productivity, and then honored them, meaning I carve out time. I know first thing in the morning or last in the day or middle of the afternoon, if I have 2 hours of time where I'm uninterrupted, it's amazing what's possible. If everybody on the team were doing that and we're communicating clearly, and they were actually scheduling team meetings or synchronous meetings around as best as possible those peaks, then we'd be a lot further along. Most companies are zapping their productivity because people are literally just in back-to-back meetings.
Absolutely. I talked to a guy last week and I said, how many meetings do you have in a week? And he said, I've spent like 50 to 60 hours a week in meetings.
Yes.
Like, how do you tap into your intuition? Knowing this other way of even just creative thinking, however you want to call it, when you schedule yourself so tight. I was just listening to, an interview of somebody who said that Zapier, you mentioned about Zap. So Zapier, which is the software company that helps connect different types of programs, they ended up trying an experiment where they decided for an entire week, there would be no meetings at all. You could communicate through Slack or what have you, but no meetings for a week. And people came back feeling pretty energized because, one, they had that intuitive time, but two, they got work done they couldn't have gotten done doing 50, 60 hours of meetings in a week. So there's something to be said for being intentional about creating the space for not only getting work done, but just also being able to intentionally create some space around creative thinking, intuitive gut checking, whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So Slack's one of the companies that I've worked with pretty closely over the last 5 years, and they similar, and many other of my clients also do similar. So they call it Makers Week, and they say, everybody, it doesn't matter what function you're in, but you're going to have focused time to actually execute on the things that you've been wanting to for however long. And some people do hackathons, again, regardless of what function you're in, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. What does matter is that people have, especially in this knowledge-based industry where we're requiring people to share their expertise, and that's the value that we have that we're investing in for these different roles that we have in our companies. If we aren't actually setting them up to tap into the best of their knowledge, meaning they have enough breaks, they stay hydrated, they're present, they're aligned with purpose, and they're bringing play. Like, what does it require for every leader to be able to do your 3 Ps? If we started thinking about that, and in our one-on-ones, we asked our direct reports, hey, do you feel connected to purpose? Do you feel like you have this bandwidth to do whatever you need to do to stay present? And do you feel like you're in a mindset of play? And if not, they'll solve for those things before we actually solve for the tactical problems. Again, we'd be much further along.
Absolutely. So let me ask a question. If there was one thing that you want people to know, what would it be?
Sometimes I think about what belief system I would love to just insert in every human's brain. And I love to ask people that same question of like, if you could insert any belief into everybody's mind, what would that be? And I don't have one answer, but my current answer is that you are accepted. I think a lot of challenge at all ages for humans comes from feeling like we have to prove ourselves, which is just the breeding ground for insecurity or imposter syndrome or all sorts of things. And so if I could really help people feel like they are accepted and they have nothing to prove, I think more of us would relax into our wisdom or what we're calling our intuition. And we would slow down in the right moments to create acceleration for ourselves and our team in kind of new and innovative ways. It starts to take care of itself. So for me, I've been root causing it as much as I can. And I think that's my current thinking.
No, we do spend so much time and energy just trying to feel worthy and try to get past whatever those demons are that say that we're not. And then on the other side is probably we are in our own skin. We're authentic. That doesn't mean that we're not gracious and have good emotional intelligence and, caring of others, but we first and foremost care for self. We accept self. I mean, how do you accept another person to the degree that you would like if you don't accept yourself? I mean, it has to start there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Miriam, this is a great conversation. I could just keep going on and on and on with this. I'm so blessed by this little podcast that was just one of those crazy ideas this is now we're 2 years into it, and I get to meet wonderful people like yourself.
Mhm.
How can people connect to you?
They can go to leaderswhosmile.com. I think that's so pulling on your concept of play. I think leaders who smile, some of the most seasoned leaders easily smile even through the hard times, feeling like, okay, we're going to figure this out together. So leaderswhosmile.com. And on behalf of everyone listening, Dean, I want to say thank you to you. I know creating a podcast is very much a labor of love, and it takes a lot of sustained attention and effort. And so thank you. I want to extend gratitude for all of us who have benefited from the work that you do specifically here. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, you're very kind. It's I get so much back. I don't know whether I almost think that I'm getting another, degree every time I have somebody on this show. So it's fantastic. So thank you so much for your gratitude, your energy, and your smile, and continue the great work that you're doing.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.